Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was in lab rats. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in ground gamma tasted of rust and ozone. It was a familiar flavor to Izuku Midoriya, the taste of focused training and controlled destruction. The sprawling industrial complex, a labyrinth of pipes, catwalks, and towering chemical tanks, was one of UA High's most versatile training grounds. Today, it was the stage for a simulation, apprehending a cornered villain with a volatile, area of effect quirk. It was supposed to be a standard exercise, a test of teamwork, analysis, and restraint. Supposed to be. He's unpredictable. Tenya Ida's voice boomed through their comms, laced with the rumble of his engines as he zipped between massive cylindrical structures, a blue and silver blur. His quirk doesn't create stable portals. It folds the space around him. The very ground is unreliable. No kidding. Achiko Uraraka called out, her voice slightly breathless. She was perched precariously on a swaying gantry crane, her gloved fingers pressed against its surface. Below her, a section of ferrocrete buckled and warped like hot plastic, the villain at the center of the distortion laughing maniacally. It's like the world is a funhouse mirror. Deku crouched behind a pile of corroded I-beams, green lightning crackling faintly around his body. One for all, full cowling at 5% was a comfortable hum now, a second skin of power that no longer threatened to shatter his bones with every movement. His mind, however, was racing far faster than 5%. He scribbled furiously in the small, worn notebook he'd brought into the field, his eyes darting back and forth between the villain and his own frantic sketches. The villain, a wiry man in a garish purple jumpsuit calling himself Warpgate, was more of a hazard than a combatant. He wasn't strong or fast. His power was pure, chaotic defense. Every time they tried to approach, the space around him would twist. A straight path would suddenly become a 100-meter detour. The air would thicken like molasses, or a solid wall would ripple like water. He was a glitch in reality, and his desperation was making him more dangerous by the second. His distortions are anchored to him, but they pulse outwards, Deku muttered, his analysis a low, rapid-fire whisper that had become famous among his classmates. The effect is strongest at the epicenter, but the aftershocks are random. He isn't controlling it, he's just releasing it. Like a pressure valve. If we can time our approach between the major pulses. No time, Midoriya. Ida's voice cut through his concentration. He's making a break for the residential sector boundary. We have to contain him now. Deku's head snapped up. Ida was right. Warpgate was scuttling towards a chain-link fence that marked the edge of the training ground. Beyond it lay a simulated cityscape, and in a real scenario, that meant civilians. They couldn't let him get there. Uraraka-san, can you lift the ground beneath him? Unbalance him? Deku shouted into his comm. I can try, but it keeps twisting. It's like trying to grab smoke. She replied, frustration evident in her tone. Ida-kun, create a diversion on his left flank. Draw his attention. On it. Ida revved his engines, kicking up a cloud of dust as he sped off. This was their chance. As Ida's armored form created a feint, Warpgate turned, his face contorting in a snarl. He thrust his hands out, and the space between him and Ida warped violently, a section of the ground stretching into a grotesque, elongated ramp. But his attention was diverted. That was the opening. Now, Deku's body exploded with motion. He pushed off the ground, the concrete cracking under the strain of his jump. Green energy flared brighter around him as he ricocheted off the side of a large metal tank, then off a steel support beam, building momentum. It was a classic pinball maneuver, just as Gran Torino had taught him. Use the environment. Be the projectile. He was a green comet closing the distance in seconds. Warpgate's eyes widened in terror as he finally spotted the incoming hero student. In a final, desperate act, he threw his arms wide, pouring every ounce of his energy into one last, massive distortion. It was different this time. It wasn't just a warp or a bend. The air in front of him tore open. It wasn't a hole, but a shimmering, oily vortex of non-space, the edges flickering with sickly violet light. It began to suck in dust, gravel, and loose debris, a hungry, silent vacuum. The very laws of physics seemed to scream in protest around its edges. Deku's analytical mind processed it all in a fraction of a second. That's unstable. Terribly unstable. It's not just folding space, it's collapsing it. If that implodes, the shockwave could level this entire block. He couldn't stop it from a distance. He couldn't just tackle the villain. He'd be pulled in too. He needed to disrupt the energy field itself, to deliver a sharp, concentrated shock that could shatter the delicate, unnatural formation of space-time. A punch wouldn't work. The point of impact was too small. He needed something with a wider area of effect. His fingers snapped into position. The familiar pressure built in his fingertip, the coiled serpent of One for All's immense power begging for release. 5% won't be enough to disrupt it. I need more. Just for a moment, he focused the power, letting it surge past the comfortable 5% limit, just in his arm, just in his finger. He could feel the pressure building, the ghost of a familiar, searing pain threatening his bones. Delaware smash! He roared. A cannon blast of compressed air shot from his fingertip. It wasn't just wind, it was a physical manifestation of kinetic force, a focused shockwave that ripped through the air. It was a perfect shot, aimed not at the villain, but at the dead center of the swirling vortex. For a breathtaking moment it worked. The blast of green-tinged air slammed into the violet tear. The two opposing energies met with a sound that wasn't a sound, a piercing shriek that seemed to vibrate directly in the bones of everyone present. Then, everything went wrong. Instead of shattering, the two forces reacted. The raw, life-filled energy of One for All acted like a catalyst on the unstable spatial quirk. The violet vortex didn't collapse. It swelled, blooming like a black flower. The green lightning from Deku's attack was consumed, sucked into the vortex and twisting with the violet energy. A web of green and purple cracks spread across the air itself, as if the world were a pane of glass on the verge of shattering. Deku Kuen! Uraraka screamed, her voice filled with pure terror. Deku was still in midair, his momentum carrying him forward. The vortex, now supercharged, exerted a terrifying, irresistible pull. It wasn't like wind or gravity. It was a fundamental wrongness, a pull on his very existence. He felt his costume begin to fray, his skin tingling as if being pulled apart atom by atom. He clawed at the air, trying to find purchase, but there was nothing to hold on to. He could see the horrified faces of Ada and Uraraka, their forms beginning to distort at the edges of his vision. He tried to scream their names, but the sound was stolen from his lungs. The world dissolved into a sickening kaleidoscope of light and color. Green lightning, violet darkness, the blue of the sky, the rust of ground gamma, all of it smeared together into an impossible painting. He felt a lurch, a nauseating sensation of being turned inside out and squeezed through an impossibly small hole. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. There was a final, blinding flash of green light, and Izuku Midoriya was gone. The vortex, its energy spent, collapsed in on itself with a soft pop, leaving behind nothing but a faint smell of burnt sugar, and the echoing silence of a hero's vanishing act. Pain was the first sensation. A deep, grinding, full-body ache, as if every single one of his muscles had been torn and reknit a dozen times over. The second sensation was the harsh, gritty texture of concrete against his cheek. The third was a smell, a nauseating cocktail of stagnant water, rotting garbage, and something vaguely metallic. Izuku Midoriya groaned, the sound a pathetic rasp in his throat. His head pounded in time with his frantic heartbeat. He tried to push himself up, but his arms trembled and gave way, sending him crashing back down onto the grimy pavement. One for All was a barely there flicker under his skin, a guttering candle flame where a bonfire should have been. The interdimensional trip, or whatever it was, had drained him almost completely. He managed to pry one eye open. The world swam in a blurry haze. He was in a narrow alleyway, flanked by tall, brick buildings. A dumpster overflowing with black trash bags stood a few feet away, the source of the revolting smell. High above, a sliver of pale blue sky was visible, crisscrossed by a tangle of black wires. Where am I? He pushed again, this time managing to get onto his hands and knees. His hero costume was a wreck. The fabric was torn in several places, one of the metal plates on his shoulder was bent at an odd angle, and his mask was gone completely. He coughed, the action sending a fresh wave of agony through his ribs. Slowly, shakily, he got to his feet, using the rough brick wall for support. He took in his surroundings with a growing sense of dread. The graffiti on the walls wasn't in Japanese. The script was alphabetic, the words foreign but legible from his English classes. Mission City Punks, one tag read. A faded poster on the opposite wall advertised something called Tech Town with a smiling, cartoon robot. Mission City? I've never heard of a city in Japan with that name. He stumbled out of the alley's mouth, squinting against the surprisingly bright sunlight. The world that greeted him was both familiar and profoundly alien. There were cars, but they were sleeker, quieter, with different shapes than the ones he was used to. The architecture was different, a mix of modern glass and steel structures and older, boxier buildings. People bustled along the sidewalks, their faces and clothes subtly different, their language a constant, flowing stream of English. A wave of vertigo washed over him. This wasn't just a different city. This was somewhere else entirely. The villain, he whispered, his voice hoarse. His quirk, it didn't just move me. He couldn't finish the thought. It was too terrifying, too ludicrous. He was alone. Injured. In a foreign land with no idea how he got here or how to get back. His friends, his mother, all might. They were all a world away. Panic began to set in, a cold, constricting snake coiling in his chest. He leaned against the wall, taking deep, shuddering breaths, trying to fight down the overwhelming urge to just sit down and cry. No. Stop. You're a hero. Panicking won't help. He needed to think. To analyze. What were the facts? Fact 1. He was no longer in Japan. Fact 2. He was injured and his quirk was nearly depleted. Fact 3. No one knew where he was. His mission was clear. Survive. Gather information. Find a way home. It sounded so simple. So heroic. But as he looked at the sea of unfamiliar faces, none of whom would know what a quirk was, let alone a dimensional warping villain, Izuku Midoriya had never felt more like a scared, lost kid. Leo Dooley was on a mission of vital, world-altering importance. A mission that required stealth, cunning, and a deep understanding of complex technical jargon. One AAA battery, Leo, his mom, Tasha, had said, not even looking up from her reporter's laptop. Just one. For the remote. You can handle that, right? My skill set is vast and my courage is legendary, Leo had replied with a dramatic flourish. But this may be my greatest challenge yet. Tasha had just sighed and handed him $10. So here he was, walking down the street towards Tech Town, the son of Mission Creek, California, beating down on him. The mission was, admittedly, less glamorous than he'd made it out to be. Still, it was a good excuse to get out of the house. Ever since they'd moved in with the eccentric billionaire Donald Davenport, life had been weird. Awesome, but weird. And sometimes a guy just needed a break from secret labs and superpowered bionic siblings who could accidentally throw you through a wall. He rounded the corner by the tech store, humming the theme song to his favorite video game, when he saw it. A heap of green and white fabric crumbled at the mouth of the alleyway. Whoa, he said, stopping in his tracks. Looks like someone went a little too hard at the convention. His first thought was that it was a cosplayer. A really, really dedicated one. The costume was incredibly detailed, with intricate metal parts, specialized boots, and a design that looked like it was ripped straight out of a high-budget anime. The person was lying face down, unmoving. Hey, buddy? You alright? Leo called out, taking a cautious step closer. Comic-Con was last month, you know. No response. A prickle of concern went through him. He crept closer, his sneakers scuffing on the pavement. Dude? Hello? He gently nudged the figure's shoulder with the toe of his shoe. The figure groaned and stirred, slowly rolling over. Leo got his first proper look at the person's face. It was a kid, probably around his own age, with a wild mop of dark green hair and a face covered in freckles. And cuts. And bruises. His eyes, a brilliant and startling green, fluttered open, filled with a dazed, agonizing confusion. Okay, So maybe not a convention, Leo muttered to himself, his sarcastic demeanor faltering. The injuries looked way too realistic to be makeup. The costume was genuinely torn and scorched in places, and the kid was breathing in ragged, shallow gasps. The green-haired kid tried to speak, but it came out as a weak, foreign-sounding word. Doko. Don't know Doko either, pal, Leo said, his hands fluttering uselessly at his sides. He looked up and down the street. It was mostly empty. Should he call 911? An ambulance would come, then the police. They'd ask questions. This kid was in a weird outfit, speaking a different language, and looked like he'd been in a 5-car pileup. He'd be in a world of trouble. Leo's gaze fell back on the kid's face. Despite the pain and confusion, there was something in his eyes. A kind of frantic, desperate intensity. It wasn't the look of a troublemaker. It was the look of someone who was completely and utterly lost. And Leo Dooley, for all his bravado and wisecracks, had a soft spot for lost causes. After all, he'd been one himself before the Davenports found him. Alright, look, Green bean, Leo decided, grabbing one of the kid's arms. You can't stay here. You're gonna have to come with me. The kid flinched at the touch but seemed too weak to resist. He mumbled something else in that same language, Japanese, Leo guessed. Yeah, I bet it is, Leo grunted, trying to haul the surprisingly dense kid to his feet. Okay, you are way heavier than you look. What are you made of, rocks and protein powder? With a monumental effort, Leo managed to get the kid's arm over his shoulder, half dragging, half carrying him. The kid's legs were unsteady, and he leaned heavily on Leo, his head lolling. Just lean on me, man, Leo panted, a new thought occurring to him. Oh, this is a bad idea. This is a terrible idea. My mom is gonna kill me. Davenport is gonna dissect you. Adam will probably try to eat your hair. But you know, what's life without a few terrible ideas, right? Staggering under the weight, Leo began the slow, arduous journey back to the high-tech fortress he now called home. His simple mission for a single battery having escalated dramatically into an international incident of one. Sneaking a semi-conscious, cosplaying foreigner into a multi-million-dollar smart mansion was, Leo discovered, significantly harder than it looked in the movies. The main entrance was a no-go. Tasha or Mr. Davenport might be in the living room. The garage was a possibility, but it had more sensors than a spy satellite. That left the side door by the pool, which thankfully had a blind spot in the security camera coverage that Leo had discovered weeks ago. He half-carried, half-wrestled the green-haired kid through the gate, across the pristine patio, and through the sliding glass door, all while whispering frantic reassurances like, "We're almost there. Just don't bleed on the Italian marble, it's a rental." The kid was mostly dead weight, his consciousness flickering. He'd occasionally mumble something in Japanese, his brow furrowed in pain. Leo finally managed to get him up the grand staircase and into the relative safety of his bedroom, collapsing onto the floor in exhaustion after gently depositing his new guest onto the bed. Leo's room was a shrine to nerd culture. Posters for sci-fi movies and video games adorned the walls. Shelves overflowed with comic books and action figures. In the corner, a state-of-the-art gaming console sat humming quietly. It was Leo's little pocket of normalcy in a house that was anything but. He got his guest a glass of water from the en-suite bathroom. When he returned, the kid was stirring, pushing himself into a sitting position with a pained wince. His vivid green eyes were clearer now, darting around the room, taking in the strange posters, the unfamiliar architecture, the whole alien environment. They finally landed on Leo, and they were wide with alarm. The kid scrambled backwards on the bed, adopting a defensive posture that was clearly practiced, even though his body screamed in protest. "Who are you? Where am I?" he asked, his voice rough but firm. The English was heavily accented, structured with a textbook formality. "What is this place?" Whoa, easy there, Karate Kid, Leo said, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "You're safe. My name's Leo. You took a pretty nasty fall back there. I found you in an alley." The kid's eyes narrowed, his gaze sharp and analytical. It was unnerving. He was scanning Leo, the room, the exit, assessing threats. A fall? No, there was a villain. His quirk. He trailed off, his expression clouding with confusion. I don't understand. Yeah, join the club, Leo said, inching a bit closer and offering the glass of water. Look, whatever LARP session you were in got way out of hand. You've got some pretty bad cuts. You should drink this. The kid eyed the glass suspiciously for a moment before his thirst seemingly won out. He took it with a grateful nod, draining half of it in one go. Thank you, he said, his posture relaxing slightly. He introduced himself, his name coming out stiffly. My name is Izuku Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya, Leo repeated slowly. Cool name. Sounds like it's straight out of an anime. Which, judging by the hair and the outfit, is kind of your whole deal, huh? Midoriya's brow furrowed. Anime? I do not understand. My suit is my hero costume. Your hero costume, Leo repeated, making air quotes. Right. For protecting the innocent from, what, evil space wizards? Rogue dungeon masters? The confusion on Midoriya's face was so genuine, so profound, that Leo's sarcastic amusement began to curdle into a different kind of confusion. This wasn't an act. This kid genuinely had no idea what he was talking about. I am a student, Midoriya said, his voice earnest and intense. From Yue High School. In the hero course. Leo stared at him. Yue High? Never heard of it. And trust me, I know all the weird private schools. My new stepdad tried to send me to one for advanced technological etiquette. It's a thing, apparently. It is the top hero academy in all of Japan. Midoriya insisted, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. Everyone knows it. All Might went there. All who? Leo asked, completely lost. The name sounded like a cleaning product. The look on Midoriya's face was one of absolute, soul-crushing horror. It was the face someone might make if you told them the sky was green or that pizza had never been invented. All Might? The number one hero? The symbol of peace? Dude, are you feeling okay? Did you hit your head? Leo asked, now genuinely concerned for the kid's mental state. Look, there are no number one heroes. There are actors who play heroes in movies, like Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, but he doesn't actually fly around in a metal suit. Midoriya just stared at him, his mouth slightly agape. The color was draining from his face. No, that's not possible. Quirks. 80% of the population has a quirk. Society is built around them. How can you not know? A quirk? Leo tilted his head. What's that? Like a weird habit? 'Cause I have a bionic brother who chews on metal when he's nervous, so believe me, I get weird habits. The kid, Midoriya, slid off the bed and staggered over to the window, his movements jerky and panicked. He pulled back the curtains and looked out at the street below. He saw the American cars, the English street signs, the unfamiliar architecture. He saw a world humming along with a normalcy that was, to him, the most abnormal thing he had ever witnessed. This isn't Japan, he whispered, his voice trembling. He turned back to Leo, his eyes wide with a terrifying, dawning realization. Where am I? What is the date? You're in Mission Creek, California, Leo said slowly, the absurdity of the situation starting to feel very, very real. And it's October 25th. Why? Midoriya sank to his knees, his hands gripping his own wild green hair. The villain, his quirk wasn't just spatial distortion. It was dimensional. It sent me somewhere else. A world without quirks, without heroes. Leo stood frozen, the empty water glass still in his hand. His brain, which had been operating on the assumption that this was all just a big misunderstanding involving a very committed role-player, was now trying to process an entirely new, and frankly insane, possibility. This kid wasn't acting. He wasn't concussed. He genuinely believed he was a superhero in training from another dimension. And the scariest part? The way he said it, the raw, unadulterated panic in his eyes, the absolute certainty in his voice. Leo was starting to believe him. Okay, Leo said, his voice barely a whisper. He set the glass down and took a step back, running a hand through his own hair. Okay. Another dimension. Right. Cool. Cool. He started to pace, his mind racing. This was beyond anything he could have imagined. This was crazier than finding out his new stepdad had 3 bionic, superpowered teenagers living in a secret lab in the basement. Wait a minute. A slow grin spread across Leo's face. The panic was replaced by a sudden, brilliant idea. Midoriya thought his world was weird? Oh, he hadn't seen anything yet. You think my world is normal? Leo said, a new, mischievous energy in his voice. You think you're the only one with secrets? Midoriya looked up at him, his expression a mixture of despair and confusion. What are you talking about? You're in the right place, Midoriya, Leo said, puffing out his chest. Because you have stumbled into the one house on this entire planet that might actually understand. You want to see something weird? I'll show you something weird. Before Midoriya could react, the bedroom door swung open. Leo, honey, I'm home. Tasha Dooley's voice called out from downstairs. Did you remember to get that battery? Leo's eyes widened in panic. His brilliant idea would have to wait. Operation Hide the Interdimensional Hero was officially a go. He grabbed Midoriya by the arm, his mind scrambling for a plan. The closet! Now! He hissed, dragging the bewildered hero in training towards the small walk-in closet. Don't make a sound. Don't breathe. Don't even think loudly. My mom's a reporter. She can smell a story from a mile away, and boy, from another universe is the kind of story that gets you on Oprah. He shoved Midoriya into the closet among his hoodies and sneakers, pulled the door shut, and spun around with a painfully fake smile just as his mother's footsteps reached the top of the stairs. The normal world was knocking, and he had a universe of weirdness hiding behind a flimsy wooden door. The silence in Leo's bedroom was thick enough to be a physical presence. It pressed in on Izuku Midoriya, heavy with the weight of unspoken, unbelievable truths. He was still on the floor, the rough fibers of the carpet imprinting on his palms, his mind a maelstrom of denial and dawning, terrifying acceptance. A world without quirks. A world without heroes. It was the stuff of pre-quirk-era history books, a fossilized concept from a bygone age. And yet, the evidence was all around him, in the mundane perfection of the suburban street outside, in the guileless, confused face of the boy named Leo. Leo, for his part, was in the midst of a full-blown panic attack, his earlier bravado having evaporated the moment he heard his mother's voice. He was currently trying to shove a stray piece of Midoriya's tattered white glove further into the closet, hissing frantic instructions. Okay, look, my mom's got a sixth sense for weirdness. If she asks who you are, just say you're, my exchange student cousin from Japan, Ada. Yeah, Japan, Ada. It's a small, very polite country next to regular Canada. Midoriya, still reeling from the existential crisis of being displaced from his own reality, could only stare blankly from his hiding spot. That is not a real place. It is now. Just roll with it. Leo hissed back, just as the doorknob began to turn. He slammed the closet door shut, spun around, and leaned against it with a smile so wide and fake it looked painful. Tasha Dooley entered, a vision of maternal grace with a reporter's sharp, inquisitive eyes. She held a single, tiny battery between her thumb and forefinger. I found one, she announced, her smile warm but her gaze sweeping the room, immediately sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Leo, are you all right? You're acting jumpy. And you're sweating. Sweating? Nah, that's a proactive moisturizing routine. Leo improvised, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. Keeps the skin supple. Very big in Japan, Ada. Tasha's eyebrow arched. Japan, Ada? Leo, what is going on? She took a step into the room, and her keen eyes spotted it, a small, dark green smudge on the cream-colored carpet near the bed. It looked suspiciously like dried blood. Her expression shifted from amused suspicion to genuine concern. Leo. Is someone else in here? Before Leo could concoct another, even more ludicrous lie, a soft, polite cough emanated from the closet. It was followed by a muffled, apologetic-sounding string of Japanese. Leo's face fell. He closed his eyes. Busted. Tasha's mom mode engaged instantly. She strode over, pushed the feebly resisting Leo aside, and pulled open the closet door. There, crammed between a row of colorful sneakers and a hanging collection of hoodies, was Izuku Midoriya. He looked up at her, his big green eyes wide with a mixture of fear, shame, and the distinct look of someone who had recently been through a tumble-dryer full of bricks. For a moment, nobody moved. Tasha stared at the boy in the strange, battered green and white outfit. Midoriya stared back at the woman who was looking at him with an expression of profound shock. Leo just wished the floor would open up and swallow him whole. Leo, Tasha said, her voice dangerously calm. There is an injured boy in your closet. You have 10 seconds to give me one very good reason why I shouldn't ground you until you have grandchildren. He's from another dimension. Leo blurted out, deciding that the insane truth was probably better than any lie he could invent. Tasha just stared at him, her expression unchanging. 9 seconds. I am so sorry for the intrusion, ma'am, Midoriya said, untangling himself from the clothes and stepping carefully out of the closet. He bowed stiffly, a gesture of pure, ingrained politeness that seemed utterly bizarre in the context of him being found in a teenager's closet. My name is Izuku Midoriya. I did not mean to cause any trouble. Tasha's hard expression softened as she got a proper look at him. He wasn't a threat, he was a child. A child who was hurt, scared, and trying desperately to be respectful. She saw the cut on his cheek, the dark bruises forming on his arms, the way he favored his left side. Good heavens, you're hurt, she said, her concern overriding her anger at Leo. What happened to you? It is a long story, Midoriya said, his gaze flickering down to the floor. Which I have time for, a new voice boomed from the doorway. All three of them jumped. Donald Davenport stood there, impeccably dressed in a designer blazer, holding a tablet in one hand. He had an air of casual, self-assured genius, but his eyes, sharp and calculating, were locked onto Midoriya. Eddie, he said to the air, run a facial recognition scan, cross-reference with all global databases. And alert me if any of my security perimeters have been breached. An invisible, synthesized voice replied from the ceiling speakers. Scanning, Mr. Davenport. No matches found. And all your precious perimeters are intact. The only breach appears to be in your son's common sense. That's a permanent condition, Eddie, Donald retorted without looking away from Midoriya. He strode into the room, his expensive shoes making no sound on the carpet. He circled Midoriya like a shark examining a strange new species of fish. His gaze was intense, analytical, and deeply unsettling. The costume, Donald mused, tapping his chin. Advanced polymer blend, I'd guess. Some kind of carbon fiber reinforcement in the plating. The design is theatrical. The technology, however, is not insignificant. Those boots appear to have shock-absorbing soles composed of a metallic alloy I don't immediately recognize. Donald, stop cataloging the poor boy's clothes and help him. Tasha chided, moving to Midoriya's side and gently guiding him to sit on the edge of Leo's bed. I am helping, Donald said defensively. Observation is the first step to analysis. Who are you? He asked, his tone shifting from scientific curiosity to sharp interrogation. How did you get into my house without triggering a single one of my multi-million-dollar security systems? Midoriya flinched under the intensity of the questioning. Leo-san brought me here. I was unconscious. In an alley. And before that? Donald pressed. I was at my school. Midoriya explained haltingly, his formal English struggling to keep up with his racing thoughts. There was a training exercise. A villain appeared. His quirk, his power, it was unstable. I tried to stop him, but my attack collided with his power and I was here. Donald Davenport raised a skeptical eyebrow. A villain? A quirk? You're telling me you were transported here via a superpower? He let out a short, dismissive laugh. Kid, I invent technology light years beyond anything on the consumer market. I deal in the cutting edge of what's possible. And what you're describing is impossible. But it's true, Leo insisted. He thinks he's from another dimension. A world where everybody has superpowers. Donald pinched the bridge of his nose, looking at his stepson with an expression of profound exasperation. Leo, we've talked about this. You can't just bring home every stray you find, especially not the ones who are clearly delusional. The word hit Midoriya harder than any physical blow. Delusional. Was he? Had he hit his head so hard that he'd fabricated his entire life? No. He could feel it. The ghost of One for All, weak as it was, still hummed in his bones. He could remember the feeling of full cowling, the faces of his friends, the reassuring smile of All Might. It was real. It had to be. It is real, Midoriya said, his voice quiet but firm, a surprising steel entering his tone. I can prove it. The challenge hung in the air. Donald Davenport, a man who believed only in data, evidence, and his own towering intellect, looked at the earnest, battered teenager and saw only a fantasy. Can you now? Donald said with a condescending smirk. All right, kid. Show me. Show me your quirk. Midoriya took a deep breath. He focused, reaching for the embers of One for All within him. He tried to draw on that familiar wellspring of power, to summon the green lightning that was as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. He pushed. Nothing happened. A faint, sickly tingling ran up his arm, and then faded. He was too drained. The dimensional transit had exhausted the power, leaving him with nothing but an empty tank. A cold knot of dread formed in his stomach. He tried again, gritting his teeth, a sheen of sweat breaking out on his forehead. Still nothing. The connection was there, but it was frayed, unresponsive. He looked up, his face pale, his eyes wide with a new kind of fear. I can't. It's gone. Donald let out a theatrical sigh. There, you see? The mind is a powerful thing. You've clearly experienced some kind of trauma, and your brain has concocted this elaborate narrative to cope. Tasha, let's call Dr. Evans. He's a good psychiatrist. Leo, find your friend here some normal clothes. We'll get him sorted out. He turned to leave, dismissing Midoriya as a closed case, a problem to be outsourced. The finality in his voice was like a door slamming shut on Midoriya's hope. He was trapped. No one believed him. He was truly, utterly alone. Leo saw the look of absolute despair on his new friend's face. He saw Donald's smug certainty and his mom's worried pity. And something inside him snapped. He couldn't stand it. He had to do something. Wait! Leo shouted, stepping in front of Donald. You think his world is weird? You think he's the crazy one? You want to see something impossible? Fine. Come with me. Donald stopped, turning with an annoyed expression. Leo, I don't have time for your games. It's not a game. Leo insisted, his voice cracking with passion. He thinks our world is normal and boring. I'm just gonna show him he's wrong. I'm gonna show him the real secret of this house. Tasha's eyes widened. Leo, no! But it was too late. Leo had already grabbed Midoriya's arm, pulling the stunned boy to his feet. Come on, Midoriya. You're about to get a major upgrade from my closet. He dragged the bewildered Midoriya out of the room and down the grand staircase, leaving a shocked Tasha and an intrigued, if still skeptical, Donald Davenport in his wake. Well, Donald said, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. This should be interesting. Where are we going? Midoriya asked, his mind still struggling to process the rapid-fire events of the last 10 minutes. He was being pulled through a stunningly modern, minimalist mansion by a boy he met less than an hour ago. To the one place where impossible is just another Tuesday, Leo said, his voice filled with a conspiratorial excitement. He led Midoriya past a massive, open-plan living room with a sofa that looked bigger than a car and into a smaller hallway. He stopped in front of a pair of nondescript metal doors. An elevator. Midoriya looked at it, confused. In a house this technologically advanced, he supposed a private elevator wasn't that strange. UA had dozens of them. It's an elevator, Midoriya stated, his analytical brain kicking in despite his confusion. It seems normal. Oh, it's normal on the way up, Leo said with a grin, pressing a button on a nearly invisible keypad next to the doors. But we're not going up. The doors slid open with a quiet hiss. The interior was sleek and metallic. Leo pushed Midoriya inside and then stepped in after him, just as Tasha and Donald came hurrying down the hall. Leo, stop this right now, Tasha demanded. You can't just show a complete stranger. He's not a stranger, he's a friend. Leo shot back. And he needs to see he's not alone in the weird department. He pressed a button on the panel, one marked with a simple triangle pointing down. The doors slid shut, sealing them inside. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the floor dropped out from under them. Midoriya's stomach lurched into his throat. This wasn't the gentle, controlled descent of a normal elevator. This was a freefall. A high G plunge that pressed him against the ceiling. Alarms blared, and red lights flashed around them. His hero instincts, muted as they were, screamed at him. This was a malfunction, a catastrophe. It's breaking! He yelled, trying to find a handhold. Nope. Just a 10-story drop. Leo yelled back over the noise, looking thoroughly pleased with himself. Just as Midoriya braced for an impact that would surely pancake them, the descent slowed with a bone-jarring lurch, transitioning into a horizontal slide. He was thrown against the side wall as the capsule shot forward through what felt like a tunnel. A few seconds later, it decelerated just as abruptly and settled into place with a final, definitive clunk. The alarm stopped. The red lights were replaced by a cool, white glow. The doors slid open. Midoriya stumbled out, his legs shaky, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked up, and every thought of quirks, villains, and being lost evaporated from his mind, replaced by a single, overwhelming sense of awe. He was standing in a cavernous, subterranean laboratory. It was immense, a cathedral of science. Consoles filled with glowing holographic displays lined the walls. Wires and conduits snaked across the high ceiling like metallic vines. In the center of the room stood several large, cylindrical glass tubes. Strange, futuristic devices, things he couldn't begin to identify, were mounted on workbenches. The air hummed with the quiet, powerful thrum of advanced technology. He had seen the support labs at UA. He had marveled at Mayhatsum's workshop, a chaotic den of explosive genius. But this was different. This wasn't a school or a corporate R&D department. This was personal. It was one person's vision, one person's kingdom, built on a scale that was simply breathtaking. Is that a miniaturized particle accelerator? He muttered, his analytical instincts taking over as he pointed to a large, ring-shaped device. The energy shielding required would be immense. And that console, is it running on a quantum processing core? He took a few steps forward, his eyes wide, drinking in every detail. The structural integrity of this place. To build this under a residential property without causing any surface instability, the geological surveys alone must have taken years. The elevator behind him dinged, and Donald and Tasha stepped out. Donald wore a smug, proprietary smile. Quantum photonic hybrid, actually, Donald corrected him, preening under the appreciative analysis. And it only took me 18 months. I had some very advanced tunneling drones. Before Midoriya could ask any more questions, a whirlwind of motion and sound erupted from a side chamber. 3 teenagers, 2 boys and a girl, entered the main lab area, bickering loudly. I'm just saying, if you'd used a standard plasma charge instead of trying to modulate the frequency, you wouldn't have melted the titanium target, said the shortest of the 3, a boy with dark hair and an intense, focused expression. Where's the fun in that, Chase? Retorted the girl, who moved with a lithe, restless energy. You have to experiment. Push the boundaries. I pushed a boundary once, the third and largest boy added cheerfully. It fell on Mr. Davenport's car. They stopped dead when they saw Midoriya and Leo. The 3 of them were a study in contrasts. The big one, Adam, was built like a linebacker and had a simple, open face. The girl, Bree, was sleek and athletic, her eyes sharp and impatient. The shortest one, Chase, had a look of fierce intelligence, and held himself with an air of superiority. Ah, Leo, Bree said, crossing her arms. Who's your friend? The one dressed for an alien invasion? And why is he in our multi-million-dollar secret basement lab? Chase added, his eyes narrowing as he gave Midoriya a critical once-over. He's an unregistered variable. I don't like variables. Guys, this is Midoriya, Leo announced dramatically. Midoriya, this is Adam, Bree, and Chase. My new, super-powered bionic siblings. Midoriya stared at them. Bionic? Like cyborgs? The word was archaic in his world, something from old sci-fi comics. But here, in this lab, it suddenly seemed plausible. You are enhanced? Midoriya asked, his curiosity piqued. Enhanced? Chase scoffed. We're the most advanced cybernetic organisms ever created. I have super intelligence and sensory manipulation. Bree has super speed. And Adam has super strength and a real knack for knocking things over. Adam finished for him, giving a friendly but slightly dim-witted wave. He squinted at Midoriya's hair. Is your hair a plant? Can I water it? No, you may not water the new guest, Donald said, stepping forward to take charge. They're my greatest inventions, he declared, gesturing to the trio with a flourish. The perfect fusion of man and machine. The future of humanity. Midoriya looked from the bionic siblings to the incredible lab around him. A world without quirks, perhaps, but not without power. It was just different. Manufactured, not born. Technology, not biology. It was fascinating. See? Leo said, nudging Midoriya. Told you our world wasn't so normal. The atmosphere in the lab was thick with tension. Adam, Bree, and Chase were staring at Midoriya with undisguised suspicion. Donald was observing his reaction with the keen interest of a scientist. Tasha just looked like she was developing a major headache. All right, the introductions are over, Chase said, stepping forward. Now, why is he here? This is a massive security breach. He needed to see, Leo started, but was cut off by a sudden, piercing alarm. A red light began to flash on one of the training consoles. What's that? Tasha asked, her voice laced with anxiety. It's just the training simulator, Chase said dismissively, tapping at a holographic interface. I was running a diagnostics on the Mark IV combat droid. It must have hit a glitch. He typed a few commands, but the alarm only grew louder. That's odd. The core programming is locked in a recursive loop. Suddenly, a section of the lab wall slid open, and a sleek, humanoid robot on wheels zipped out. It was about 4 feet tall, with multiple appendages ending in various tools and, most worryingly, a laser emitter. Its single, red optical sensor swiveled, fixing on the group. Threat detected, the droid buzzed in a distorted, monotone voice. Engaging containment protocols. Chase, shut it down. Donald ordered, his calm demeanor finally cracking. I'm trying. Chase shot back, his fingers flying across the keypad. It's not responding. The safety overrides are offline. The droid's laser emitter began to glow, charging with a high-pitched whine. It swiveled, its targeting laser dancing across the group before locking onto the person it perceived as the least physically threatening, the one without a bionic signature. It locked onto Leo. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Bree tensed, ready to move. Adam took a half-step forward, his fists clenching. Chase yelled in frustration, pounding on the console, but they were all a fraction of a second too late. They were used to reacting to threats in a training environment, with set parameters. This was unexpected. Uncontrolled. Midoriya was not. His entire life, from the moment he was diagnosed quirkless to his first day at UA, had been about observing and reacting. He had watched heroes, analyzed their movements, and drilled their techniques into his muscle memory. His mind was a library of combat data, and his body, honed by All Might's brutal training regimen, was a weapon. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He just acted. The fear he'd felt, the exhaustion, the despair, it all vanished, burned away by the white-hot fire of his heroic instinct. He reached inside himself for the dregs of One for All, and this time, spurred by the imminent danger to the first friend he'd made in this strange world, the power answered. It wasn't a flood. It was a spark, but it was enough. Full cowling, 5%, green lightning, vibrant and alive, erupted around his body. It crackled in the air with a sound like tearing silk, casting the sterile white lab in an emerald glow. Red lines, like glowing circuitry, traced their way up his limbs as the power surged through his veins. The hum of the lab was drowned out by the thrum of raw, biological energy emanating from him. He moved. To the Davenports and the bionic siblings, it was like he simply teleported. One moment he was standing near the elevator, the next he was a green blur of motion, covering the 20 feet between himself and Leo in less than a blink of an eye. He was faster than anything they had ever seen that wasn't Bree. But her speed was a smooth, frictionless glide. His was explosive, violent. The floor tiles cracked under the force of his takeoff. He shoved Leo hard, sending him stumbling out of the line of fire. Get down! he yelled, his voice resonating with a power that wasn't there before. The droid fired. A brilliant crimson beam of energy shot across the lab, aimed right where Leo's chest had been a millisecond earlier. Midoriya didn't dodge. He met it head-on. He brought his right arm up, the metal bracer of his costume catching the brunt of the blast. The laser hit with a shower of sparks and a deafening sizzle. The heat was intense, the force staggering, but the costume, designed by UA's support course to withstand far worse, held. He didn't just block it. He used the blast's momentum, twisting his body and pivoting on his heel. With his free hand, he lunged forward and slammed his palm against the droid's head. It wasn't a smash. It was a controlled, precise application of force, just enough to shatter the droid's optical sensor and fry its primary processing unit. The droid shuddered. Its red eye flickered and died. It let out a final, pathetic buzz and then slumped over, inert and smoking. The entire sequence, from the droid firing to its deactivation, had taken less than 2 seconds. Silence descended upon the lab once more, broken only by the faint crackle of green lightning as it slowly subsided around Midoriya's form. He stood over the disabled robot, his chest heaving, his arms still tingling from the laser blast. The exertion had taken its toll. The spark of One for All was already fading, leaving him feeling drained and hollow again. He turned to face the others. Every single person in the room was staring at him, their faces a mural of disbelief. Leo was on the floor, his mouth hanging open in pure, unadulterated awe. Woe was all he could manage to breathe. Adam's simple-minded grin was gone, replaced by a look of stunned respect. He's sparkly and strong. Bree's jaw was slack. She was the fast one. No one was supposed to be that fast. How did you do that? Chase had abandoned his console and was staring at Midoriya, his super-intelligent brain visibly short-circuiting as it tried to process what it had just witnessed. My bioscanners are picking up massive, fluctuating energy readings from him. It's not mechanical. It's not chemical. It's biological. But that's impossible. The energy output he just displayed exceeds the theoretical maximum for cellular energy conversion by a factor of I don't even know. But it was Donald Davenport's reaction that was the most telling. He had taken a step back, his tablet forgotten in his hand. The skepticism, the condescension, the smug superiority, all of it had been wiped from his face. It was replaced by an expression of pure, manic, scientific ecstasy. His eyes were wide, gleaming with the thrill of discovery. He wasn't looking at a teenage boy anymore. He was looking at a miracle. A phenomenon. A living, breathing impossibility that had just rewritten the laws of physics in his own basement. It's real, Donald whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. He began to pace, muttering to himself, his mind moving 1,000,000 miles an hour. Organic energy generation on a macro scale. A biological catalyst for kinetic amplification. This isn't an advancement in science, this is a whole new science. The applications, the potential, it's limitless. He stopped pacing and fixed his gaze on Midoriya, a predatory gleam in his eye. Your quirk, he said, the words now filled with reverence instead of scorn. Tell me everything. How does it work? What are its limits? What is its fuel source? I need to know. Midoriya straightened up, still breathing heavily, and met the billionaire's intense gaze. It's called One for All, he said, his voice steady. And all I know is that it sent me to your world. I need to get home. The statement hung in the air, a plea and a declaration. Donald's manic energy suddenly focused, his expression turning calculating. He saw the opportunity, the bargain of a lifetime. A way home, Donald repeated, tapping his lip thoughtfully. Interdimensional travel, it's a theoretical nightmare. The energy calculations alone are staggering. You didn't just move through space, you punched a hole through the fabric of reality itself. To replicate that, to open a stable portal back to your specific point of origin, would require technology that hasn't been invented yet. It would take resources, manpower, and a deep understanding of the exotic energy that brought you here. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He took a step closer to Midoriya. I have the resources, he said, his voice a low, persuasive hum. I have the technology. And I have the intellect. I can do it. I can send you home. Hope, fragile and tentative, flickered in Midoriya's chest. You can? But Donald continued, raising a finger. I need something in return. I need data. Your power, this. One for all, it's the key. The energy signature it leaves is the only thing we can use to track your home dimension. I need to study it. I need to understand it. The deal was laid bare. An exchange. His cooperation for a ticket home. Midoriya looked at the faces around him. At Leo, who had saved him and believed him. At the bionic siblings, who now looked at him with a newfound respect, tinged with fear. And at Donald Davenport, the genius who saw him not as a person, but as the ultimate scientific prize. He was a stranger in a strange land, with no power and no allies. All Might wasn't here to guide him. Mr. Aizawa wasn't here to give him gruff, logical advice. He was on his own. He had to make this choice himself. You want to experiment on me? Midoriya asked, his voice wary. Experiment is such a dirty word, Donald said with a wave of his hand. I prefer collaborative analysis. Diagnostics. Stress tests. We'll run simulations, compare your output to my bionics. Nothing invasive, I assure you. Your safety would be a high priority. Midoriya thought for a long moment. It was a deal with a devil, perhaps, but a devil who held the only key back to his own world. To his mother. To his friends. To his destiny as a hero. He had to take the chance. He looked Donald Davenport straight in the eye, his own gaze hardening with a resolve that was far older than his years. I will help you, Izuku Midoriya said, his voice clear and strong. I will let you study my quirk. But you have to promise me two things. Donald leaned in, intrigued. I'm listening. First, no one gets hurt because of these tests. Not me, not your family, he said, glancing at the bionic siblings. And second, you have to promise me that you will do everything in your power to get me home. Donald's lips curled into a triumphant smile. He extended a hand. You have my word. Welcome to the team. Midoriya. Izuku looked at the offered hand, then reluctantly shook it. The grip was firm, the deal sealed. He stood in the heart of a secret laboratory, a million miles from everything he had ever known, an alien specimen to a mad scientist. The weight of his decision, and the long, uncertain road that lay before him, settled upon his shoulders. He was no longer just a lost student. He was a collaborator, a test subject, and the sole ambassador of a world filled with impossible power. And he was very, very far from home. The next morning, the air in the Davenport mansion's subterranean lab was electric with anticipation. For Donald Davenport, it was the scientific equivalent of Christmas morning, the Super Bowl, and a Nobel Prize ceremony all rolled into one. He had been up all night, running preliminary simulations based on the scant data he'd collected from the combat droid incident. The results were so far outside the known laws of biophysics that his supercomputers had flagged them as errors 3 times before he manually overrode the protocols. Izuku Midoriya, on the other hand, felt a familiar knot of performance anxiety tightening in his stomach. He stood in the center of the vast training area, a section of the lab with reconfigurable walls and a floor made of a durable, slightly yielding polymer. He was dressed not in his hero costume, which was being meticulously repaired by one of Davenport's automated drones, but in a simple gray tracksuit provided by Tasha. It was comfortable, but he felt exposed without the familiar weight of his gauntlets and mask. He had spent most of the night awake, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling of Leo's guest room. The reality of his situation was a heavy blanket, threatening to smother him. Yet, amidst the fear and homesickness, a tiny, resilient spark of his usual self had ignited. He was in a world of unimaginable technology, surrounded by individuals with powers created by science, not genetics. As a hero and an analyst, he was sitting on a gold mine of new information. Before falling into an exhausted sleep, he had borrowed a pen and a fresh notebook from Leo, and on the first page, under the heading Bionic Abilities, Preliminary Analysis, he had already started sketching Chase's force fields and theorizing about the mechanics of Bree's super speed. All right, people, let's get this science fair on the road, Donald announced, striding into the training area with a flourish. He was wearing a pristine white lab coat over his designer suit, looking every bit the theatrical super scientist. He held a tablet that was already displaying a dizzying array of biometric charts and energy graphs. Izuku, my boy, today is the day we quantify the impossible. Adam, Bree, Chase, and Leo stood on the sidelines. Leo was vibrating with excitement, ready to act as cheerleader and color commentator. Adam was idly trying to bend a solid steel rod in his hands, looking bored. Bree was stretching, limber and focused, a competitive glint in her eyes. Chase was observing Midoriya with an unnervingly intense stare, as if trying to solve a complex equation by looking at it hard enough. His own tablet was synced to his father's, and he was already monitoring Midoriya's baseline vitals. The parameters are simple, Donald explained, his words coming in a torrent of enthusiasm. We will conduct 3 comparative trials, pitting Izuku's organic abilities, his quirk, against the pinnacle of my technological achievements, my children. He beamed at Adam, Bree, and Chase, who collectively rolled their eyes at the familiar theatrics. Each test will focus on a different metric, speed, strength, and strategy. All the while, my sensors will be gathering every scrap of data on your energy output, cellular regeneration, and kinetic force distribution. This data will be the bedrock upon which we build your ticket home. The mention of home sharpened Midoriya's focus. This wasn't just a contest. It was a means to an end. It was his first real step on the long road back to his own world. He nodded, his expression hardening with determination. I understand. I'm ready. Excellent. Donald clapped his hands together. First up, the test of velocity. Bree, you're on. Bree smirked, jogging in place. Finally, a chance to stretch my legs. Hope you can keep up, Green Bean. Midoriya's eye twitched at the nickname, but he ignored it. He had faced down villains who could turn people to dust. A little trash talk wasn't going to rattle him. The test is a 3-lap run through the Omega obstacle course, Donald instructed, gesturing to the training area. With a whir of hidden machinery, walls, platforms, and barriers rose from the floor, creating a complex, multi-level track. It's not just a straight line. It requires agility, reflexes, and the ability to adapt to a changing environment. First one to complete 3 laps and cross this finish line wins. On my mark, Bree crouched into a sprinter's starting position, her body a coiled spring of potential energy. Midoriya mirrored her, but his stance was different. It was lower, more balanced, ready to explode in any direction. He closed his eyes for a second, focusing on the familiar sensation within him. The well of One for All felt fuller today, partially replenished after a few hours of sleep. He drew on it carefully, wrapping himself in the emerald lightning of full cowling. 5% should be enough, he thought. I need to conserve energy for the other tests. Get set. Donald's voice echoed in the cavernous room. The air crackled around Midoriya. Chase's eyes widened as he stared at his tablet. His cellular energy levels are spiking. It's like every one of his cells just became a miniature power plant. Go! Bree was gone. She didn't so much run as she simply vanished from the starting line, reappearing 100 yards down the track in a blur of motion. She was a phantom, a whisper of displaced air, her movements so fast they were almost imperceptible. She took the first corner at an impossible speed, a gust of wind the only evidence she had ever been there. And Bree takes an early, and what looks to be an insurmountable, lead. Leo yelled, cupping his hands around his mouth. Does our interdimensional hero have an answer for that? Midoriya hadn't even tried to match her initial burst. He knew he couldn't. His power wasn't about sustained, frictionless velocity. It was about explosive, targeted force. As Bree navigated the course on the ground, a fluid line of pure speed, Midoriya looked at the obstacle course and saw something else entirely. He saw a jungle gym. He exploded from the starting line, the polymer floor groaning under the force. Instead of following the track, he leaped. His jump carried him 20 feet into the air, and he landed on the side of a large, vertical wall. For a split second, he clung there, defying gravity, before kicking off with another thunderous burst of power. He was a green pinball, ricocheting from surface to surface. He didn't run around the barriers. He vaulted over them. He didn't navigate the hairpin turns. He launched himself off a wall, spun in midair, and landed already facing the new direction. From Bree's perspective, the world was a high-speed blur, a tunnel of motion she effortlessly controlled. She felt the familiar exhilaration of her bionics, the perfect hum of her internal gyroscopes keeping her balanced, her synthetic muscle fibers firing in perfect sequence. She was in her element, the undisputed queen of speed. She glanced over her shoulder, expecting to see Midoriya as a distant green speck. Instead, she saw him soaring through the air above her, a comet of green lightning, having taken a shortcut over a section of the course she had to run around. "What the?" she exclaimed, her concentration breaking for a fraction of a second. That was all it took. Midoriya landed on a high platform, his shock-absorbing boots soaking up the impact. He was now slightly ahead of her, albeit on a different level of the course. He saw the next turn was a sharp 90-degree angle at the end of a long, narrow platform. Running it would require him to slow down significantly. He didn't slow down. He ran straight off the edge. For a terrifying moment, he was in freefall. Then he aimed his leg at the wall of the adjacent structure, kicked off it like it was solid ground, and used the momentum to propel himself across the gap, landing perfectly on the next section of the track. "Whoa! Did you see that?" Leo screamed. "He's not running the course, he's breaking it." Donald was practically vibrating with glee, his eyes glued to his tablet. "Incredible! His directional control is instantaneous. Bree's bionics require a microsecond to calculate and adjust for course correction at high velocity. His quirk, it's purely instinctive. He's not thinking, he's just doing." Bree gritted her teeth. The initial fun of the race had evaporated, replaced by a fierce, competitive fire. This newcomer, this biological anomaly, was showing her up in her own domain. "No way," she thought. "He might be agile, but he can't beat my raw speed." She pushed her bionics harder. The world around her compressed even further. The hum in her ears grew into a roar. She became a living missile, tearing through the second lap. She didn't bother with flair or style. She was just a blur of pure, unadulterated speed, retaking the lead as she blazed through a straightaway while Midoriya was navigating a complex series of platforms. They entered the final lap, Bree in the lead. The final stretch was a long, straight run to the finish line, but it was littered with swinging, pendulum-like obstacles. For Bree, it was a simple matter of timing. Her bionic mind could calculate the trajectory and frequency of the pendulums in an instant, allowing her to weave through them without breaking stride. Midoriya was right behind her. He knew he couldn't outrun her in this final stretch. He had to do something different. He saw the pendulums not as obstacles, but as opportunities. As Bree weaved, he leaped. He landed on the flat top of the first pendulum as it swung forward, riding it for a moment to gain momentum before leaping to the next, and then the next. He was a parkour artist in fast forward, a green blur hopping from one moving platform to another. They were now neck and neck, hurtling towards the finish line. Bree was on the ground, a streak of motion. Midoriya was in the air, leaping from the final pendulum. It was going to be a photo finish. Bree gave it one final push, a surge of power that created a miniature sonic boom in her wake. She was pure velocity. Midoriya, seeing he was going to fall just short, did something that defied all logic. In midair, he angled his body, curled his finger, and flicked. Delaware smash! It was a tiny burst, less than 1% of his full power, a controlled puff of air. But in the near vacuum created by Bree's speed, it was enough. The air cannon acted like a tiny thruster, pushing him forward that extra few feet. He flew across the finish line, landing in a neat roll, a mere heartbeat before Bree zipped past it. He had won. Silence reigned for a moment as the two competitors caught their breath. Bree leaned over, hands on her knees, panting heavily. Her bionics prevented muscle fatigue, but the sheer mental strain of running at that speed was exhausting. Midoriya was also breathing hard, the green lightning of full cowling receding back into his skin, leaving him feeling drained but exhilarated. I can't believe it, Bree managed to say between breaths, a look of grudging admiration on her face. You're insanely fast. You are faster, Midoriya replied honestly, offering her a tired but genuine smile. In a straight line, I would not have a chance. Your speed is beautiful. So controlled. Mine is just falling with style. Bree let out a short laugh, the competitive tension finally breaking. Falling with style? You were flying. Yes. Leo screamed, running over and throwing his arms around Midoriya's shoulders. Team interdimensional weirdo for the win. The data is phenomenal, Donald muttered, staring at his screen in a trance. His peak velocity is lower than Breeze, but his acceleration and deceleration are nearly instantaneous. He's not bound by the same laws of momentum. It's like he can turn kinetic energy on and off like a light switch. Astonishing. After a short break, during which Tasha insisted on bringing everyone nutrient-dense smoothies, even superpowered teenagers need their vitamins, she had declared, it was time for the second test. Round 2, the test of strength. Donald announced, gesturing towards a reinforced plasteel table that had risen from the center of the floor. Bolted to its surface was a device for arm wrestling. Adam, my boy. You're up. Adam, who had finally managed to tie the steel rod into a pretzel shape, tossed it aside with a clatter. Sweet. Time to make some arm sadness. He lumbered over to the table and sat down, flexing a bicep that was thicker than Midoriya's head. Ready, green plant? Midoriya sat opposite him, feeling distinctly outmatched. Adam was a mountain of a boy, and Midoriya knew from his analysis that his strength was bionic, meaning it likely didn't have the same biological limits as a normal person's. The sensors in the table will measure the torque and pressure exerted by both participants, Chase explained from the sidelines, ever the analyst. Adam's maximum output is rated at over 10 tons of force. Be careful, Midoriya. His bionic endoskeleton means his joints and bones can withstand that pressure. Yours cannot. Thank you for the warning, Chase-san, Midoriya said, appreciating the genuine concern. He placed his elbow on the pad and gripped Adam's hand. It was like shaking hands with a forklift. Adam's hand was warm, but underneath the skin, it felt unnaturally dense and solid. Ready? Adam asked, his goofy smile in place. Midoriya nodded, taking a deep breath and activating full cowling. The green lightning flared to life, more intensely this time as he channeled it into his arm. Begin! Donald yelled. Adam's smile vanished. His expression became one of simple, placid concentration. He applied pressure, and Midoriya felt like his arm had been caught in a hydraulic press. It was an immense, unyielding force, a tidal wave of pure strength that threatened to snap his bones instantly. He poured more of one for all into his arm. 5% wasn't enough. He pushed it to 6%, then 7%. The green energy around his arm flared violently. The air began to hum. The plasteel table, designed to withstand incredible forces, started to creak and groan. Veins stood out on Midoriya's forehead as he strained, his face a mask of pure effort. Their hands were locked in the center, trembling with the titanic struggle. Adam's eyes were wide. He could feel it. It wasn't just muscle against muscle. There was a weird energy coming from Midoriya's arm, a raw, almost nuclear power that was pushing back against his bionics. It felt explosive. Unstable. Dude, Adam grunted, his own arm starting to tremble. What is that? It feels like your arm is gonna explode. Midoriya knew he was right. He could feel the familiar, terrifying ache beginning in his bones, the precursor to a break. He was at his absolute limit for controlled output. He could push further, he knew he could. He could unleash a 20% smash and not only win, but likely launch Adam across the lab. But the price would be his arm. He couldn't afford an injury like that here, so far from Recovery Girl, so far from home. This was a test, not a battle. Restraint was the key. With a frustrated cry, he relented, cutting the power flow. Adam's strength, no longer meeting resistance, slammed Midoriya's arm down onto the pad with a loud thump. And the winner is Adam, Leo announced, though his voice was more subdued this time. Adam let go of Midoriya's hand, shaking his own as if to get the feeling back. Whoa, he said, the goofy smile returning, though it was tinged with awe. That was crazy. For a second there, I thought you were gonna win. You're like a really strong noodle. Midoriya cradled his right arm, which was throbbing painfully. He had managed to avoid a break, but his muscles and tendons were screaming in protest. Your strength, it is incredible. So stable. The data confirms it, Chase said, looking up from his tablet. Adam's power output was consistent and controlled. Yours was a volcano. The peak force you generated just before you stopped was almost equal to his, but it was wildly unstable. My readings show microfractures were starting to form in your radius and ulna. But what a peak! Donald exclaimed, practically giddy. Which brings us to the next phase of this test. He pressed a button on his console, and a massive, industrial-looking hydraulic press rose from the floor. This will measure pure, upward lifting strength. Adam, set the benchmark. Adam strode over to the machine, positioning himself under the massive plate. With a deep breath, he squatted and pushed. The digital display on the side of the machine whirred to life, the numbers climbing at a dizzying rate. They shot past 1 ton, then 5, then 10. With a final, mighty grunt, Adam locked his legs, the number settling at an astonishing 15.4 tons. A new personal best. Donald cheered. Excellent work, son! Adam stepped back, wiping a single bead of sweat from his brow. Not bad. Try and beat that, Noodle Arm. It was Midoriya's turn. He knew a controlled 5% or 7% wouldn't even come close. This wasn't about control or stability. It was about raw, peak output. He thought of All Might, of lifting refrigerators and pulling trucks on that beach. He had to go past his limit, just for a moment. He stepped under the plate, the cold metal pressing down on his shoulders. He took a deep, centering breath, trying to ignore the ache in his arm. He focused, channeling one for all not just through his arms, but his entire body. He let the power build, pushing past the safe, comfortable 5%, letting it flood his muscles. One for all, full cowling. 8%. The green lightning around him erupted, twice as bright and twice as loud. The red lines on his skin glowed with fierce intensity. He let out a roar that was more animal than human and pushed. The numbers on the display became a blur. They shot past 5, past 10, past 15. The entire machine shuddered under the strain. 16, 17, 18 tons. The numbers were still climbing, but the cost was immediate and agonizing. A searing, white-hot pain shot through his entire body. It felt like his muscles were being torn from his bones, like his joints were being ground into dust. This was the pain he knew all too well, the price of borrowing a power that was still too big for his body. He couldn't hold it. With a cry of pain, he collapsed, stumbling out from under the machine as the hydraulic plate crashed back down to its starting position. The final number on the screen was frozen, a testament to his incredible, fleeting power, 18.7 tons. He had won. But he was on his hands and knees, panting, his body trembling with pain and exertion. Adam rushed over, his usual boisterousness replaced with concern. Dude, are you okay? You made a scary noise. I'm fine, Midoriya gasped, forcing himself to his feet. Every fiber of his being screamed in protest. Just pushed a little too hard. He beat me, Adam said in a quiet, stunned voice, looking from the display back to the trembling Midoriya. He's stronger than me. The statement wasn't resentful. It was one of pure, simple fact, and it had clearly shaken him. His peak output is higher, yes, Chase clarified, though he too looked impressed. But look at the cost. His vitals are all over the place. Heart rate is through the roof, adrenaline levels are critical. My sensors indicate minor tearing in at least 8 different muscle groups. It's an unsustainable level of power. A Pyrrhic victory. But what a victory for science! Donald crowed, completely oblivious to Midoriya's pain. This confirms it. His power source has a far greater potential than my bionics. It's just inefficient. Unrefined. If I could just figure out how to stabilize that energy transfer. He trailed off, lost in a world of theoretical physics. Midoriya, leaning against the wall for support, knew that stabilizing the energy transfer was the very thing his entire hero's journey was about. It wasn't a bug. It was a feature of a power meant to be grown into, not just used. The final test was delayed for nearly an hour to give Midoriya time to recover. Chase, in a surprising show of empathy, brought him a small, metallic pouch. It's a protein and electrolyte gel, he explained stiffly. It should aid in muscle recovery. My analysis suggests your cellular regeneration is abnormally high, but this should accelerate the process. Midoriya accepted it with a grateful nod and found that the strange, citrus-flavored paste did indeed soothe the worst of his aches. During the break, he sat quietly in a corner, scribbling furiously in his new notebook, sketching Adam's arm and trying to diagram the raw force he'd felt. He added notes, hypotheses, and questions. Bionic strength appears linear and capped. One for all is exponential but physically damaging. Is there a way to replicate bionic stability with biological power? Perhaps by focusing on muscle groups in sequence rather than all at once. Finally, Donald called them back. Time for the grand finale. The test of mind over matter. A battle of wits, not just brawn. Chase, it's your turn. The training room floor reconfigured itself again, rising into a complex maze of walls, crates, and platforms. A single, glowing blue flag stood on a pedestal at one end of the room, and a red one stood at the other. The objective is simple. Capture the flag, Donald announced. You each start at your own flag and must retrieve the others. You are free to use your abilities, but the goal is not to incapacitate your opponent, but to outthink them. First to bring the opposing flag back to their base wins. Chase cracked his knuckles, a confident smirk on his face. This won't be like the others. You can't just overpower this. This is my game. I can process 1,000 variables a second, calculate every possible outcome. You're strong and you're fast, Midoriya, but you're also predictable. Midoriya simply looked at Chase, then down at his notebook, and then back at Chase. Everyone is predictable, he said quietly, if you have the right data. The statement gave Chase a moment's pause. He narrowed his eyes, and the game was on. They took their positions. Begin. Chase's first move was unexpected. He didn't move at all. He stood perfectly still, his eyes closed. Activating tactical interface, he murmured. A semi-transparent holographic map of the arena bloomed in the air in front of him, visible only to him through his bionic eyes. It showed a red dot for himself and a blue dot for Midoriya. Analyzing probable routes, calculating optimal interception points. Midoriya, meanwhile, exploded into motion. He didn't run towards the flag. He ran for the high ground, leaping silently to the top of a tall stack of crates, giving him a vantage point over the entire maze. From his pocket, he pulled out the notebook and flipped it open, his eyes scanning the pages he'd just been writing. Chase's voice echoed through the arena, amplified by the lab's speakers, a tactic of psychological warfare. Your most likely path is Route 7 Gamma, using your leaping ability to bypass the main choke point. A 78.4% probability. But I've already accounted for that. As if on cue, a shimmering, blue force field materialized in the air, blocking the exact path Midoriya would have taken. His force fields are his best defense and offense, Leo commented from the sidelines. He can create them anywhere in his line of sight. Midoriya didn't seem fazed. He simply leaped to another section of the maze, taking a completely different route. A faint, Chase's voice echoed again, laced with amusement. Clever. But my simulations predicted a 12.3% chance of that, too. Another force field snapped into existence, cutting off Midoriya's new path. You can't move anywhere I haven't already anticipated. Chase began to move, striding confidently through the maze. He wasn't running. He was walking, letting his brain and his force fields do all the work. He was a chess master, and Midoriya was just a pawn on his board. For several minutes, this continued. Every move Midoriya made was countered. Every path he took was blocked. It was frustrating, like fighting a ghost who knew his every thought. He's not predicting my moves, Midoriya realized, crouching behind a low wall. He's predicting the most logical move. He thinks I'm a machine, an equation to be solved. He thinks I'll always choose the most efficient path. He looked down at his notebook, at his frantic sketches of Chase. Superintelligence. Relies on data and probability. Overconfident in his own predictions. He remembered his battles at UA, the ones he'd won not by being the strongest, but by being the most clever. He thought of his fight against Shinso, of his plan against Todoroki. I can't outcalculate him. So I have to be illogical. Midoriya stood up. He took a deep breath, activated full cowling, and ran straight at the nearest solid wall. An irrational move, Chase's voice noted with detached curiosity. There is no exit that way. Probability of success 0. Midoriya didn't try to break through the wall. Instead, he leaped, planting his feet on its surface and running horizontally for a few steps before kicking off, sending himself spinning through the air. In mid-flight, he flicked his finger, sending a tiny Delaware smash not at Chase, not at a force field, but at a stack of empty metal barrels in a completely different quadrant of the maze. The barrels crashed to the ground with a deafening clang. In his control center, Chase's sensors flared. Loud noise detected. Potential structural collapse. Redirecting sensory focus. For a single, vital second, his attention, his data streams, his very focus was pulled towards the sound. It was an unexpected variable, and his system prioritized analyzing it. That 1 second was all Midoriya needed. While Chase was distracted, Midoriya landed silently behind a different wall, now completely hidden from Chase's line of sight. He was off the grid. Sensory anomaly resolved, Chase's voice said, a hint of confusion in it now. Subject location unknown. Rescanning, but Midoriya was already moving, a green shadow flitting through the blind spots he had identified. He wasn't moving towards the flag. He was moving towards Chase. Chase had reached Midoriya's flag and was about to grab it. Checkmate, he said with confidence. Just as his fingers were about to touch the red fabric, a blur of green motion came flying over the wall behind him. Chase reacted instantly, his bionic reflexes spinning him around and throwing up a defensive force field between them. Midoriya landed in front of him, the two of them separated by the shimmering blue barrier. Nice try, Chase said, a triumphant smirk returning. But you're too late. He reached back for the flag. Am I? Midoriya asked, a small smile on his face. Confused, Chase looked down. His flag was gone. He spun around. On the pedestal where the red flag should have been, there was a single, small object. It was Midoriya's notebook. Chase's brain stuttered. He replayed the last 30 seconds in his mind. The feint with the barrels, the moment of sensory distraction. While he was rescanning the maze, Midoriya must have circled around, grabbed the flag, and continued his momentum over the wall, leaving the notebook in its place as a final, taunting gesture. He had used his superior intellect against him. You used a logical fallacy, Chase whispered, a look of profound, intellectual shock on his face. You created a red herring to force a false positive, in my threat analysis. You were trying to predict my body, Midoriya said, panting slightly as he held the red flag in his hand. You should have been trying to predict my mind. The simulation ended. Donald called it a draw, since either had successfully returned the flag to their base, but everyone knew who had truly won the engagement. Chase walked over to Midoriya, the force field dissipating. He looked at the boy, the anomaly, the variable, with a completely new expression. It wasn't suspicion or arrogance. It was respect. Deep, unadulterated, intellectual respect. That was... He started, then stopped, searching for the right word. That was an impressive strategic execution. Your analytical skills are highly advanced. Yours are, too, Midoriya said honestly. If I had tried to fight you head-on, I would have lost in seconds. He picked up his notebook and offered it to Chase. Here. Chase took it hesitantly and flipped through the pages. He saw the detailed sketches of himself, Bree and Adam. He saw the complex notes on their abilities, their strengths, their weaknesses. He saw pages filled with calculations and theoretical counters. This wasn't a diary. It was a combat database. It was a weapon. You've only known us for a day, Chase said, his voice hushed with awe. A hero needs to be prepared, Midoriya replied simply. The 3 tests were over. Midoriya was exhausted, bruised, and aching, but he stood tall. He had faced the best this world had to offer, and had proven himself their equal. The dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted. He was no longer just Donald's pet project or Leo's weird friend. To Bree, he was a rival. To Adam, he was a powerhouse. And to Chase, he was a fellow strategist, a mind worthy of respect. Well, Donald said, finally looking up from the mountain of data he had collected. I believe I have everything I need to begin. He looked at Midoriya, a new level of respect in his own eyes. Rest up, Izuku. You've earned it. The real work, the work of getting you home, starts now. As Midoriya walked out of the training room, leaning heavily on a jubilant Leo, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment. He had been tested, measured, and weighed against the marvels of this new world, and in doing so, he had not only given them the data they needed, but he had also shown them, and himself, that the heart of a hero, powered by a legacy like One for All, was a force that couldn't be quantified by any machine. It was a variable that could change the outcome of any equation. The 3 days following the Bionic vs. Quirk trials settled into a strange and surreal routine for Izuku Midoriya. He had become the most fascinating and frustrating object in Donald Davenport's high-tech kingdom. Mornings were spent in the lab, undergoing a battery of non-invasive but exhaustive tests. He would run on a specialized treadmill that measured his energy output, lift weights connected to dozens of sensors, and even have his brain activity monitored as he muttered his way through complex strategic analyses of old hero fights he recalled from memory. Donald would hover over the data streams, a manic gleam in his eye, muttering about biokinetic feedback loops and cellular capacitance. To him, Midoriya was the world's most profound puzzle, and he was determined to solve it. While the billionaire inventor wasn't unkind, his relentless scientific focus made Midoriya feel less like a person and more like a living, breathing schematic that refused to be fully understood. The afternoons, however, were different. They belonged to the kids. Leo, having firmly appointed himself as Midoriya's interdimensional best friend and cultural ambassador, would try to explain the nuances of Earth culture, which mostly involved marathon sessions of sci-fi movies and arguments about which video game character was the most powerful. Adam would challenge him to increasingly bizarre feats of strength, like trying to see who could stack the most couches, which usually ended with Tasha marching into the room with her hands on her hips. Most surprisingly, a new dynamic had formed with Bree and Chase. Bree, her competitive pride having healed into a grudging respect, would often challenge him to short, impromptu races around the mansion's sprawling grounds. She was always faster, but his unpredictable, parkour-like agility never failed to impress and frustrate her, leading to breathless laughter more often than not. Chase was the most reserved, but in many ways, the most engaged. He would often find Midoriya in the corner of the lab, hunched over his notebook, and the two would fall into deep, quiet conversations. Chase would explain the physics behind his force fields, and Midoriya, in turn, would try to describe the indescribable sensation of One for All, explaining how it was as much about emotion and willpower as it was about physical strength. They were two different species of genius, one built of logic and data, the other of instinct and analysis, and they found a strange, compelling harmony in their differences. It was during one such afternoon, while Midoriya was observing Chase and Bree run a combat simulation, that the fragile peace of their new normal was shattered. "This is pointless," Bree complained, effortlessly dodging a series of laser blasts from ceiling-mounted turrets. "The attack patterns are the same as last week. I could do this in my sleep." "The point is not the pattern, it's the efficiency of your response," Chase countered from a control booth, his fingers dancing over a holographic console. "Your energy consumption on evasive maneuvers is 3.7% higher than optimal. You're wasting movement." "Maybe if I had a real challenge." Bree was cut off by a klaxon that blared through the entire facility, a sound that made Midoriya jolt to his feet. Red lights bathed the lab in a pulsating, urgent glow. The training simulation vanished, and a massive map of Mission Creek appeared on the main view screen. "What's going on?" Leo asked, poking his head into the lab. Donald Davenport slid down a fireman's pole from his office on the upper level, landing with a practiced grace. His casual demeanor was gone, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. "It's an alert from the Mission Creek Geosurvey Institute," he announced, his voice crisp and authoritative. "They're detecting a series of localized, high-frequency seismic tremors originating from downtown." "Earthquakes?" Tasha asked, rushing in behind Leo, a worried look on her face. "Not natural ones," Donald said, pulling up a stream of data on the screen. "The energy signature is artificial. Rhythmic. It matches one of my prototypes." He groaned, pinching the bridge of his nose. "My gosh, don't tell me." "Eddie, security logs for sublevel 7, inventory item 77B. Accessing, Mr. Davenport," the disembodied voice of the smart home system replied. "Item 77B, The acoustic geoharmonizer was signed out 2 nights ago by a Dr. Alistair Crane for off-site calibration. He was fired yesterday for selling corporate secrets. And for the record, I told you he had a shifty-looking unibrow. The geoharmonizer, Donald muttered, his face grim. It was designed to emit subsonic frequencies to stabilize minor fault lines and prevent quakes. But if someone were to reverse the polarity, they could amplify the natural tectonic vibrations instead of dampening them, Chase finished, his superintelligent mind already processing the implications. They could create controlled, intensifying earthquakes. Exactly, Donald confirmed. And right now, it looks like our unibrowed friend has set it up in the middle of Mission Creek Park and is turning the entire downtown area into a giant massage chair from heck. He stabbed a button on his console. Gear up. This is a retrieval and containment mission. Bree, you're on civilian evacuation. Use your speed to create diversions and herd people away from the epicenter. Adam, you're on structural support. If the tremors get worse, you keep the buildings from coming down. Chase, your mission lead. Get me a location on that device and a plan to disable it. The 3 bionic siblings nodded, their playful attitudes gone, replaced by the steely focus of trained operatives. They ran to their capsules, and in moments, were outfitted in their sleek, dark blue and gray mission suits. Midoriya watched them, his heart pounding. People were in danger. A man-made disaster was unfolding. This was exactly what he had been training for his entire life. He took a step forward, his fists clenching at his sides. Mr. Davenport, he said, his voice ringing with purpose. What are my orders? Donald turned, looking at Midoriya as if noticing him for the first time since the alarm sounded. He held up a hand, his expression firm. Your orders are to stay right here. The words hit Midoriya like a physical blow. What? But I can help. My strength, my speed, are unquantified variables in an uncontrolled environment. Donald cut him off sharply. Izuku, you are the single most valuable and fragile scientific discovery on this planet. Your power is unstable, and we've seen what it does to your body when you push it. I cannot risk you in the field. What if you get hurt? What if your power goes out of control? The data we've gathered is the only key to getting you home. I will not risk losing that. The justification, clinical and cold, only stoked the fire in Midoriya's gut. But people are in danger. My data doesn't matter more than their lives. That's what they are for, Donald said, gesturing to Adam, Bree, and Chase, who were now standing ready by the mission elevator. They are trained for this. They operate with surgical precision and, most importantly, with secrecy. We can't have some green lightning kid in a bunny-eared costume showing up on the evening news. It would create a panic and expose everything. You are benched. That is an order. The finality in his voice was absolute. Midoriya looked at the bionic siblings. Bree gave him a sympathetic glance, Chase a look of detached agreement with his father's logic, and Adam a confused shrug. Then the elevator doors hissed open, and they were gone. Midoriya stood frozen in the middle of the lab, the red emergency lights reflecting in his wide, frustrated eyes. He could hear the faint rumble of the tremors even deep underground. He could picture the scene, terrified people, cracking pavement, the invisible threat growing stronger by the second. And he, a hero in training with the power of All Might himself flowing through his veins, had been ordered to sit on the sidelines and watch. It was a violation of his very soul. Every instinct, every fiber of his being, screamed at him to act. He's wrong, a voice said beside him. It was Leo. He had watched the entire exchange, a frown on his face. Big D is smart, maybe the smartest guy in the world. But he's not always right. He gave me an order, Leo-san, Midoriya said, his voice tight. I am a guest in his home. I cannot disobey him. And you're a hero, right? Leo countered, his gaze intense. Isn't your whole thing saving people who are in trouble? That's what you do. It's who you are. He held up a tablet, displaying a live news feed. It showed shaky cell phone footage from the park. People were running, screaming. A crack had appeared in the base of a large, historic fountain. The sight made Midoriya's stomach clench. He thought of the USJ incident, of the fight with Stain, of Kamino Ward. He had never once stood by when he could have acted. My team is good, Leo continued, his voice earnest. They're the best. But they're not perfect. Bree is fast, but she can get tunnel vision. Adam is strong, but he's Adam. And Chase. Chase is a genius. But he can get so wrapped up in his plan that he can't see what's right in front of him. They might need you, Izuku. The people out there definitely need you. The internal war raging within Midoriya reached its peak. Davenport's logic versus his own heroic creed. Obedience versus duty. He looked at the screen, at the fear on the faces of the civilians, and the choice became painfully clear. All Might had not passed one for all to him, so he could stand by and watch. My hero costume, Midoriya said, his voice low and firm. Mr. Davenport's drone was repairing it. A slow grin spread across Leo's face. He knew he had one. The automated fabrication unit. Bay 7. And don't worry about how to find them, he added, tapping his tablet. I can track their bionic GPS signals from here. I'll be your guy in the chair. With a shared look of determined rebellion, the two boys set off. One, a hero about to break the rules for the first time in this new world. The other, a sidekick enabling the glorious chaos. Downtown Mission Creek was in a state of controlled panic. The rhythmic tremors were unsettling, like a giant, invisible heartbeat shaking the very foundations of the city. The lab rats, now in their element, moved with a practiced, almost invisible efficiency. From a rooftop overlooking the park, Chase coordinated their movements, his bionic eyes scanning the chaos below, a holographic map overlaid on his vision. Bree, 2 o'clock, pedestrian walkway. Group of tourists heading towards the epicenter. Create a diversion. Down below, a blur of motion zipped past a hot dog stand, sending a shower of napkins into the air. The tourists, distracted by the sudden, miniature whirlwind, turned away from the park, grumbling about the strange Mission Creek weather. Diversion created, Bree's voice chirped in his earcom. Adam, the west entrance archway is showing stress fractures, Chase continued. Reinforce it. Subtly. Across the park, Adam, disguised in a city maintenance worker's jacket he'd borrowed, leaned against the cracking stone archway. To any casual observer, he looked like a lazy worker taking a break. But under the jacket, his bionic muscles were engaged, applying precise, counter-vibrational pressure, holding the entire structure together through sheer, silent strength. Got it, Chase. I'm being all architectural. That's not a word, Chase sighed. Just hold it steady. I've almost pinpointed the harmonizer's location. It's there. A red dot blinked on his holographic map, near the base of the park's old, ornate clock tower. It looks like he's wired it directly into the tower's electrical system to power it. Okay, team, new plan. Bree, continue evac. Adam, once the area is clear, create a perimeter. I'm going in to disable the device. Their methods were a study in minimalist intervention. They were ghosts, nudging events in the right direction without ever revealing their hand. They contained the problem, managed the public, and neutralized the threat, all without anyone ever knowing they were there. It was a philosophy of heroic espionage. It was a philosophy that was about to be spectacularly gate-crashed. Izuku Midoriya arrived on the scene a few minutes later, having taken a series of back alleys and rooftops as guided by Leo. He was now in his fully repaired hero costume, Gamma. The familiar weight of the armored plates, the iron soles of his boots, and the snug fit of his mask and its wide-eyed, smiling grate settled over him like a second skin. As he put on the mask, Deku the hero took the place of Izuku the lost student. He perched on the edge of a building opposite the park, his green eyes taking in the entire scene with a practiced, analytical sweep. He saw what Chase saw, the chaos, the mission objectives. But he also saw things the bionic teen's tactical overlay might miss. He saw the micro-expressions of terror on individual faces. He saw an elderly woman clutching her chest, her breathing shallow and panicked. He saw a small boy, no older than 7, crying, separated from his mother in the confused crowd. He saw a loose advertising billboard swaying precariously on a nearby building, its bolts shaken loose by the tremors. To the lab rats, these were acceptable casualties of a secret operation, civilians who would be fine once the main threat was contained. To Deku, they were immediate, fight alarm fires that had to be put out now. Okay, Deku, you see the clock tower? Leo's voice crackled through the small comlink they had jury-rigged. That's the target. Chase is heading for it now. I see it, Leo-san, Deku replied, his gaze locked on the crying child. But there are people who need help. Yeah, that's Bree's job. Before Leo could finish, Deku was moving. He activated full cowling at a controlled 5%, and the familiar green lightning enveloped him. He leaped from the rooftop, a silent, emerald projectile. He landed in the alleyway below without a sound, then burst out into the street. The crying boy was about to run into the path of a panicked cyclist. Deku appeared in front of him in a flash of green. He scooped the child up in his arms, his movements swift but gentle. It's okay, he said, his voice slightly muffled by the mask, but his tone calm and reassuring. You're safe now. Where's your mommy? The boy, startled but no longer crying, pointed a trembling finger towards a frantic woman near the park entrance. Deku closed the distance in 2 powerful leaps, depositing the child safely into his mother's arms. The woman stared at him, her mouth agape at the bizarre, rabbit-eared savior who had appeared and disappeared in a flash. Okay, Chase muttered from his perch, his tactical map now showing a new, unauthorized bioenergy signature. What was that? Before he could analyze it, Deku was already addressing the next problem. The swaying billboard. He saw it groaning, its last bolt about to give way, directly above a small group of people huddled in a doorway. He didn't have time to warn them. He jumped again, landing on the side of the building. He ran up its surface, a gravity-defying spectacle, and reached the billboard just as it tore free. He didn't try to catch it. Instead, he grabbed its edge and, using his momentum, threw it upwards and away from the street, sending the massive metal sheets spinning harmlessly onto the building's roof, where it landed with a distant, muffled crash. Down below, the group looked up, saw the empty space where the billboard had been, and then saw the green figure leaping away. Now people were pointing, screaming. Not all of them with fear, some with shock, with awe. Who is that guy? Bree's voice came over the comms, a note of panic in her tone. He's drawing everyone's attention. They're starting to pull out their phones. It's Midoriya. Chase realized, his voice a mixture of fury and disbelief. Davenport is going to kill us. What is he doing? He's compromising the entire mission. Deku didn't see it as compromising the mission. He saw it as performing his duty. He was a hero. His job was to save people and provide a sense of security. The symbol of peace didn't operate from the shadows. He was a bright, shining beacon against the darkness. Subtlety was a tool, not a creed. He landed in the middle of the street, and his presence had a polarizing effect. Some people, seeing a figure of obvious power, panicked further and ran. Others, however, seemed to calm down. Here was someone who wasn't running from the danger, but facing it. A hero had arrived. Everyone, please stay calm. Deku projected his voice, using the techniques he'd learned in foundational heroics. Move away from the park in an orderly fashion. Help is here. He is not helping. Chase seethed, watching his carefully managed evacuation devolve into a chaotic spectacle. Adam, forget the perimeter. We need to accelerate the timeline, get to the clock tower and provide backup. On it. Adam replied, abandoning his post at the archway, which immediately began to crumble. The tremors suddenly intensified. A deep, groaning sound echoed from the center of the park as the geoharmonizer, pushed to its limits by its unseen operator, hit a new frequency. A massive fissure split the ground, racing from the clock tower towards the street. It tore through the pavement, heading directly for a city bus that had been abandoned in the chaos. Inside, the panicked bus driver was struggling to get the doors open, which had been jammed by the shaking. Deku saw it. Adam, now running towards the tower, saw it too. They were both equidistant from the bus. Adam's solution would have been to get there and pry the doors open with his super strength. It would have taken 5, maybe 6 seconds. Deku's solution was faster. He didn't even run towards the bus. He stomped his foot on the ground, channeling a burst of one for all through the iron sole of his boot. A localized shockwave rippled through the concrete, a precisely aimed tremor of his own. The shockwave hit the underside of the bus, jostling the frame just enough to unjam the doors. The driver stumbled out, running for his life, just as the fissure reached the vehicle and tore a hole in the street where he had been moments before. Adam skidded to a stop, staring at the empty bus, then at Deku, who gave him a quick nod before turning his attention back to the clock tower. Adam just stood there for a second, his simple mind trying to process the fact that the green plant had just solved the problem without even touching it. The clash of philosophies had come to a head. The lab rat's surgical, secret ops approach had been completely derailed by Deku's loud, proud, public-facing heroism. He was a force of nature they couldn't control, a one-man paradigm shift that had turned their covert mission into a front-page spectacle. And in the heart of the chaos, Chase realized with a sinking feeling that for all the problems he was causing, Deku had saved more people in the last 2 minutes than their entire team had in the last 10. The situation was escalating into a catastrophe. The thief, a disgruntled and now terrified Dr. Crane, saw the chaos, saw the strange green hero, and in his panic, he did the worst possible thing. He cranked the geoharmonizer's power core to maximum overload, hoping the resulting quake would cover his escape. A deafening, low-frequency hum filled the air, and the ground began to shake violently. It wasn't just tremors anymore. It was a full-blown earthquake. The clock tower, a century-old structure of brick and stone, let out a tortured groan. Large cracks raced up its facade like lightning bolts, and chunks of masonry began to rain down on the plaza below. "The tower's coming down!" Chase yelled into the comms. "Bree, get out of there!" Bree was a blur of motion at the base of the tower, moving the last few stunned civilians out of the immediate fall zone. She moved with incredible speed, a human shepherd gathering her flock. But she was so focused on the people in front of her, on the rapidly changing ground beneath her feet, that she failed to look up. A massive section of the tower's stone cornice, a piece of ornate masonry the size of a car, broke free. It hung in the air for a horrifying, silent moment before plummeting directly towards her. Chase saw it from his rooftop vantage point. His mind calculated the trajectory, the velocity, the impact zone. His conclusion was instantaneous and terrifying. She couldn't escape. She was fast, but she wasn't fast enough to outrun gravity in a straight line down. He screamed her name, a raw, helpless cry. Adam was too far away, still halfway across the plaza. He could only watch in horror, his immense strength useless at a distance. Deku, who had been making his way towards the tower, saw it too. His mind didn't calculate, it reacted. The image of Bree, a look of sudden, wide-eyed terror on her face as she finally looked up, was burned into his retinas. He saw the falling rock, and in his mind, it became the giant robot from the UA entrance exam. A test. An obstacle to be overcome. There was no time for subtlety. No time for a controlled 5% burst. This required overwhelming, decisive, heroic power. He poured every ounce of the replenished energy he had into his legs and arms, pushing past the safe limits, embracing the familiar, agonizing burn. One for all, full cowling. 8%. The green lightning around him didn't just crackle, it roared. The ground beneath his feet shattered as he launched himself forward, a living cannonball of emerald energy. The air ripped around him as he closed the distance to the tower in a single, world-bending leap. He flew through the air, positioning himself directly between Bree and the plummeting tons of rock. He wasn't going to catch it. That would crush him, 8% or not. He had to obliterate it. He had to meet force with greater force. He drew his right arm back, the muscles in his back and shoulder screaming in protest. The coiled serpent of One for All's true power surged through him, concentrating into his fist. The energy was so intense that the air around his glove began to shimmer and distort. He remembered All Might's words. "A real hero is someone who smashes through adversity. Detroit smash." He roared, his voice echoing through the plaza, a sound of pure, unadulterated power. He punched up. His fist never made contact with the stone. Instead, it unleashed a catastrophic shockwave, a focused tornado of air pressure and raw kinetic force that shot upwards. The shockwave hit the fallen cornice head-on. For a split second, the massive rock seemed to hang in the air, its downward momentum completely arrested. Then, it simply ceased to exist. The concussive force was so great that the stone disintegrated, exploding into a cloud of gravel, dust, and sand that rained down harmlessly around them. The shockwave continued upwards, striking the already unstable clock tower. The rest of the structure imploded, collapsing in on itself in a controlled, vertical cloud of dust, rather than toppling over onto the surrounding area. Deku landed in a crouch in front of Bree, his right arm trembling violently, bathed in the fading green light of his power. He had saved her. He had saved the plaza, and in the process, he had just performed a feat of power so immense, so undeniably superhuman, that it would be impossible to explain away. A profound silence fell over the park, broken only by the settling of dust and the dying hum of the geoharmonizer, its power source severed by the tower's collapse. Bree stared, speechless, at the spot in the sky where the rock had been, then at Deku, who was now pushing himself to his feet, his body shaking with the aftershock of his own power. He had just saved her life with an act of casual, godlike strength. Chase stood frozen on the rooftop, his jaw hanging open. All his plans, all his calculations, had become irrelevant in the face of that single, cataclysmic punch. Midoriya wasn't just a variable anymore. He was a force of nature that defied all known metrics. Adam finally reached them, his eyes as wide as dinner plates. "Whoa," he breathed, looking at the pile of rubble that was once the clock tower. "You went all kapow! And the building went poof! That was awesome!" Deku looked at Bree, his mask hiding his pained expression. "Are you alright, Bree-san?" Bree could only nod, her mind still reeling. She looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time. Not as a lab experiment, not as a rival, not as Leo's weird friend. She saw a hero. A real one. The trip back to the mansion was a masterclass in awkward silence. The mission was, technically, a success. Dr. Crane had been apprehended by the police in the chaos, and the geoharmonizer was recovered from the rubble. But the cost had been their secrecy, which, in Donald Davenport's world, was a price too high to pay. They stepped out of the mission elevator into the lab to find Donald waiting for them. He was not happy. He stood with his arms crossed, his face a thundercloud of repressed fury. Tasha stood beside him, looking worried. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Donald began, his voice dangerously low. He wasn't yelling, which was somehow even more terrifying. His fury was cold, sharp, and aimed directly at Deku. "There are already a dozen different videos of you online," he continued, gesturing to the main screen, which was now filled with shaky cell phone clips of a green lightning hero throwing billboards and punching buildings into dust. "They're calling you the Mission Creek Meteor. The Emerald Comet. You have exposed the existence of superhuman abilities to the entire world. Everything I have worked to protect, the secrecy of this family, the safety of my children, you have jeopardized in the span of 15 minutes. He saved people, Donald." Leo piped up, unable to stay silent. "He saved Bree's life. He was explicitly ordered to stay here." Donald shot back, his voice finally rising. "He disobeyed a direct order and acted recklessly, without any regard for protocol, Mr. Davenport," Deku said, stepping forward. He had removed his mask, and his face was earnest, his green eyes meeting the billionaire's angry gaze without flinching. "I apologize for disobeying you, but I am a hero. When people are in danger, I cannot stand by and do nothing. It is not in my nature. Your nature is going to get us all discovered," Donald retorted. "Dad," a quiet voice said. It was Bree. She stepped forward, positioning herself slightly between her father and Deku. "He's right. I was trapped. There was nothing any of us could do. He saved my life." Donald's angry gaze faltered slightly as he looked at his daughter. His tactical intervention, while unorthodox and frankly, ridiculously conspicuous, Chase added, stepping up beside his sister, was the only viable solution once the situation escalated past mission parameters. "My plan failed to account for the tower's structural collapse. His did not." "Yeah," Adam chimed in, completing the united front. "And the way he made the bus door open was super smart. He didn't even have to touch it. It was like magic." Donald looked at his 3 children, his greatest creations, all of them standing in defense of the outsider, the anomaly. He saw the genuine gratitude in Bree's eyes, the analytical respect in Chase's, and the simple awe in Adam's. His anger, so fierce and righteous moments before, began to deflate, replaced by a complex mix of frustration, relief, and a dawning, grudging understanding. He let out a long, heavy sigh, running a hand over his face. This is a disaster. The PR fallout alone. I'll have to invent a weather balloon, or a new type of drone, something to explain what people saw. He looked back at Deku, his expression no longer just angry, but tired and complicated. You were reckless, he said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. You ignored protocol, and you created a massive problem for me. But, he paused, looking from Deku to his children and back again. You were also effective. And you kept my family safe. He took a deep breath. Don't ever disobey a direct order from me again. But for what you did for Bree, thank you. The admission seemed to cost him a great deal, but it was genuine. It was a crack in the armor of the scientist, revealing the father underneath. Later that evening, Deku sat on the edge of his bed, his newly repaired again hero costume folded neatly beside him. He felt a profound sense of exhaustion, not just from the fight, but from the emotional roller coaster of the day. He had broken the rules, angered his host, but he had done the right thing. He had saved people. He had been a hero. There was a soft knock on his door. He looked up to see Adam, Bree, and Chase standing there, looking slightly awkward. Hey, Bree said, fiddling with the sleeve of her shirt. We just wanted to say thanks. For real. You were amazing out there. Your application of force was illogical, inefficient, and emotionally driven, Chase added, which from him was clearly a compliment. It was also brilliant. I'm going to be studying it for weeks. Can you teach me how to punch a building into sand? Adam asked, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Deku couldn't help but smile, a real, warm smile that reached his eyes. I'll try. They stood there for a moment, a silent understanding passing between them. He was no longer just a subject of fascination or a curiosity to be tested. He was one of them now. A teammate. A friend. A hero among heroes, no matter what world he was in.